Hey everybody, my name is Matt Cook and I'm the Assistant Director of the Center for Healthy Churches. I'd like to welcome you to the Changing Church webinar. The goal of our time together this morning and every week is to give you an opportunity to be in dialogue, conversation with, to hear from experts that help the church and ministers in the church ask really good questions about the adaptations, the creative ways that we all need to think to be able to do church differently in the 21st century. It's a highly adaptive moment. And the good news is a lot of really smart people have given us the gift of their time. In a second, Jim Kitchens is going to introduce our speaker. But before he does, I want to thank all of our partners that helped make this webinar a reality. We're very grateful for the good work of New Matrix. Their co-principals, Deborah Wright and Jim Kitchens, are on with us this morning. For the good work of the Presbyterian Foundation, their Vice President Paul Greer is on with us this morning. For the Church Network, which I think, if I remember correctly, is in the middle of their annual conference, so their CEO is not able to be with us today. For the Truett Seminary and the Truett Church Network, for Gardner-Webb Divinity School, for Baptist News Global, and I represent the Center for Healthy Churches, the Lake Institute for Faith and Giving, one more organization I don't want to forget. Grateful for all of their fine work and the partnership that they give to make this webinar a reality. With that little bit of introduction, let me turn it over to Jim Kitchens to get us started this morning.
Thank you, Matt. This is the second webinar in our series on small churches and the gifts that they bring and the strengths that they have and the issues that they wrestle with, sometimes unnecessarily. And so Steve is going to help us figure out some of those issues today. And so I'm glad to welcome Steve Van Ostran, who is the Regional Executive Minister of the American Baptist Churches of the Rocky Mountains and housed in the state of Colorado. But they have churches throughout Colorado, Wyoming, New Mexico, and Utah. Steve's passion for his regional leadership work grows out of his 18 years as a local church pastor. So he served churches in Kansas, Illinois, and Indiana, and served on another regional body before becoming executive minister for Rocky Mountains. He has an MDiv from Southern Baptist Theological Seminary and his DMin from Northern Baptist Theological Seminary. So his theology and politics are just right, balancing those two up. So, Steve, we're so very glad to have you on this morning. Thankful for you giving us your time. As we get started, I'm going to ask people that if you have questions that you want to ask Steve, or as Steve is talking, you say, oh, but I want to know more about that. Please type your questions in the chat feature. And assuming we have some time sort of at the end of our conversation, I'll try to work those in and get as many of your questions into the mix as possible. Let me start this way, Steve. I knew I wanted you to be on our webinar when I read your recent article, 4 Incarnational Benefits of Bivocational Ministry. And maybe as a way to begin to get into that, in that article, you talk about how bivocational ministries often see themselves and are looked upon by others as second-class ministers. And why do you think that assessment lingers out there when some of the best pastors you personally know are bivocational pastors?
I think it's part of our culture that bigger is better, and is one of the main reasons. There still is that, and I believe it be a myth, but from the church growth era and age, the whole idea that bigger is better has always kind of permeated our midst. And more and more, I think we're seeing that even in the large churches, it's the smaller groups where we're incarnating in the language I like to use, incarnating Christ really happens. It's in those smaller groups that you're really able to be Christ to a community and to love people in His name. And so that idea that to be successful you have to be big, and most bivocational pastors are not going to be serving the corporate and the mega churches.
Right.
So
let me follow up on that by asking, sir, why is bivocational ministry important to you?
Well, one of the reasons is because the American Baptist Churches of the Rocky Mountains and American Baptist Churches USA, we're a denomination of small churches. We have a few larger congregations, but by and large, we are small churches. We have a lot of rural churches. I served a rural church. I have many rural churches in my. I have served alongside, bivocational pastors that they may not have had the opportunity to do the education that I had, or that the larger churches require, but their wisdom, the indwelling of Christ in them as they serve, their commitment, their ability to connect with the people on the margins is just, you saw Christ in them, and it was just a wonderful witness. And I think the future of the church is going to go back to bivocational ministry. One of the realities in our world is that here in the United States, bivocational ministry is not the norm. Throughout the world, bivocational ministry is the norm. One of the things that I did not get to do as a local church pastor was visit mission fields in other countries and other places. Since I begun this role, that's been one of the things that I have enjoyed most. And what I've enjoyed is I do enjoy going and trying to be, to do mission and ministry in those cultures and in those places. But what I enjoy most is learning from those cultures how they do church and how things have happened. And so I've taken a lot of pastors to the mission field with me to work with our missionaries and with their partners. And I've not had a pastor come back who hasn't said, we've been doing, we could be doing exactly what they're doing here. And on the mission field in most countries, bivocational pastors are the norm. And I'll be honest, I'm wrestling with, I think I've become convinced, and I'm blank, in the book, Part-Time is Enough, the author makes a wonderful case for the history of the church being bivocational. And that has pushed me to wonder, if Jesus didn't intend to base the church on bivocational ministry. You see Peter going back and fishing, and he's the rock. We know Paul was bivocational. And I'm even beginning to ask the question, during those years of public ministry that Jesus was involved in, might he have been bivocational? So it's just, it's one of those, for all those reasons, it's important to me, and that we begin to understand that it's not necessarily an anomaly to be bivocational. In fact, it may be preferential to be bivocational.
Well, before we formally started the webinar, some of us were talking about the decline of seminaries and everybody got saying all of Ryan Burge's wonderful graphs about the decline of American Christianity and all of our traditions. And churches, when they think about bivocational ministry, it's sort of like, well, we can't afford a full-time minister anymore. Well, maybe that's a sign of our decline. You make the case, Steve, that a lot of times churches that have struggled to maintain a full-time ministry and coming up with that money, when they finally make the move to bivocational ministry, they find that they actually thrive more than they did under full-time leadership. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, well, and so one of the things that bivocational ministry does is it forces the pastor to not do everything. There's just no way a pastor, we always talk about there's no such thing as part-time ministry. If you're bivocational, you probably have 2 full-time jobs, and that is a reality. But it does force you to do what Scripture says, to equip the saints to help you with that ministry. And so instead of having congregations that are simply audiences. You end up having congregations that are ministers and ministry and doing ministry and out and involved and doing things in the community, as well as the pastor being out and involved in the community. I think the biggest challenge to many of our churches today is that they become, and you can different languages, but they become inward focused, or they become so, how we love one another, but they're not out there in the community being Christ to the community, which is what God calls us to, in my opinion, what God calls us to do and to be. And so I really believe that sometimes going to a bivocational ministry, especially in a congregation that's aging out, it will actually help to revitalize the congregation. And that's just one of the reasons. There are a lot of other benefits that I try to spell out in that chapter that I see. And if you want me to, I can go into that further. But
Well, you talk about sort of 4 specific benefits of bivocational. Just walk through those for us.
Okay.
I'm going to throw up the link both to the article, that the recent article you wrote, but also the link to the book, because it is available.
Yeah, and the book comes out of a consortium that was funded by Lilly, so it is available online for free, or you can get a published copy of it. And but for me, there are at least 4 advantages to being bivocational. The first one being that being bivocational tends to break down that divide, that sacred secular divide for the pastor. The pastor, in so many cases, is seen as being high and holy, and oftentimes we've been taught in seminary that in order to really do a sermon well, you quote the number, how many minutes of preparation you're supposed to do for the minutes of the. And we have pastors who are very comfortable in their church office. They're very comfortable doing administrative things, but sometimes their thinking and their assessment of a situation is clouded by not being out on the street or being on the job site with the workers, or being in connection with customers who are frustrated because the milk was warm when they got it home, or whatever it is. There's not that real world connection, and I see that divide being broken down as you work in the community, or as you have to be engaged in that day-to-day business place. And I think it's one of the reasons that Jesus spent so much time in the marketplace. In my last pastorate, which was the largest of my churches and whatnot, and it was a small town of 10,000 people. We were right downtown, and yet I wanted my office to be out at Walmart. Never got around to it, but Walmart was where the community was, and where you met people and that kind of stuff. And it seems like that Jesus did that. So a part of being bivocational is that you are, people see you in a different way than just being the pastor. You're one of them as well. Second thing is that it creates community for the pastor. Like I was sharing, one of the things I see that with many pastors is that their community becomes their local congregation. And they are supposed to be the shepherd of that congregation, and they're supposed to love and to serve that congregation, but they have to get beyond the walls as well. One of the challenges to many churches to inviting new people into faith and into the community is they themselves have created just the community of the church, and when that's the pastor's community as well, there's no chance for that church to really identify people who need to know Christ, or who they can help transform and change their lives. So for a pastor to be involved in the community through work, they oftentimes find a new community to be a part of, and it gives them somebody else to walk alongside. I had one pastoral friend who kind of felt some of those issues in his life, and he joined a bowling league, and not a church bowling league, but just a bowling league, so he would be connected with a community. And I think many of our pastors need a way to connect with the community. Thirdly, when you're in the community like that, you encounter ministry opportunities. As you read the Gospels, you see Jesus, many of Jesus' miracles occur simply as he's in the community, when he's walking from place to place, or when he's sitting in the marketplace, or so many things. And I can't tell you the number of times that, in talking with my bivocational pastors, they talk about this person whom, they found out that they had a need and were able to respond to it because they were working at a bank, or they found out they had a need and were able to respond to it and bring them in because they were involved in some other type of situation beyond just the local church. And so time and time again, we find opportunities to do ministry. And one of my passions, and I prefer the term to teach incarnational versus missional, because I think sometimes missional, we are tempted, in its purest form, missional is exactly is a fantastic concept, but it's easy to begin to think, really, we're doing this ministry not out of love for the person, but we're doing it because we want to be able to share the gospel with them. Well, Jesus didn't do that. Jesus's ministry, there were 10 lepers that were healed, only one came back. And Jesus made a comment about that. But what happened to those other 9? Did they suddenly become lepers again? No, they were healed because Jesus loved them and wanted to bless them. And Jesus' ministry meant not just those basal needs, but meant needs all along the way. And I believe that if you take Maslow's hierarchy of human needs, and whichever version, because there's about 1,000 versions of Maslow's hierarchy out there now, but you take whatever version out there that you want. If you read the Gospels, I believe you can see Jesus meeting people's needs on all those levels at some point in life. The need for a friend with Zacchaeus, the need for self-actualization with the Pharisee at night. Just how he handled Mary and Martha when Lazarus died. He meets them at their different places, and so when we're out in the community, it gives us the opportunity to encounter different opportunities for ministry and to meet them where that need is the greatest. And then the other thing is that by being economically independent of the congregation, it allows you to be prophetic and more a stronger leader in the congregation. I know that when I was a pastor in a church in Southern Indiana, whose membership all had tobacco crops, I never preached about the dangers of tobacco. And when I was pastor in a community that the Shell refinery was the major employer of a lot of my congregation, and it was in the late 80s, early 90s, during the time of the South Africa and whatnot, and our denomination was saying that we needed to boycott Royal Dutch products, and all that. That never came out of my mouth in the pulpit, because that's my job depended on it. I know for a fact that one of the churches that is in my region, they went from having a full-time pastor to having to have a bivocational pastor, and this particular pastor happened to be one who was an attorney. He was a president of a university. He was well-versed, but he was able to go in there and to make some significant changes in the congregation simply because he wasn't dependent upon their salary. In fact, this was his passion. It was his, but it was not his lifeline. And so that idea, I think, is important to pastors. You can be courageous when you have kind of a parachute, a golden parachute, as far as how you're going to survive if you offend somebody or if your prophetic pronouncements don't set well with that strong leader in the congregation that pulls all the strings. So those are at least four ideas that bivocational seems to help the church be more incarnational. The fifth one would be the fact that I mentioned earlier. You can't do it all as a bivocational pastor. You can't do it all, so you have to engage the congregation in being ministers and not just being observers or supporters.
Let's say you were just talking about a church in your region that went from full-time pastoral leadership to part-time pastoral leadership. So what's the kind of support you find it's important to give a church going through that transition? Another way to ask that question is, what are the issues that pop up quickly after they've gone from full-time pastoral leadership to part-time pastoral leadership?
I think the first thing that you have to for the church itself is you have to legitimize for them the fact that their church is no less a congregation if it has a part-time pastor than if it has a full-time pastor. And I think one of the things that help us is there's a new trend out there that many church plants, some of the new church plants, and you all know this probably, but a lot of the new church plants are co-led by 2 part-time or 3 part-time or 4 part-time bivocational pastors. We have a congregation here that we have an affiliation with, but they're not a part of our. That's exactly how they were planted, and so their lead pastor is teaching at the university as well as being the lead pastor. They have the pastoral role broken up in different in different roles. Some use the fivefold, using Ephesians 4:11 and the fivefold ministry. There's questions in my mind about that, but the idea of sharing ministry and being partners in ministry and actually making the commitment to your pastoral leadership being bivocational, to me models in many ways what we, and in fact the role that I'm in now, as the church was going forward, the role that I'm in now, one of the realities of this role in the past would have been, it's equivalent to a bishop without authority or power, because we're Baptist, but bishops in the Catholic Church, they're working pastors too. So it's a really a bivocational type situation for them in that ministry as well. So to model the idea that I can be in ministry and still earn a living out here in a different way. I think it empowers the laity to say, I can be doing great things in ministry, even though I'm not a professional minister.
My colleague Deborah Wright spends a lot of time thinking out bivocational pastors and churches with less than full-time pastoral leadership. And so she asked the question, if this is becoming the new norm, it already is, you're saying, among ABC churches, but it's becoming more and more the norm for lots of traditions. How does that impact how we train people for ministry? So how does it impact what seminaries do? And how does it impact the need for other ways of preparing people for ministry that doesn't require a 3-year master's degree?
Well, I think a lot of things are happening at the seminaries to move in that direction. I not enough, in my opinion, but I think we're moving in that more. in that direction. Several things that I think need to happen. One is, yes, we need to be more available to the seminary education has to be more available to online and other types of learning than being physically present. And the kind of experience I had where you move away for 3 years, you live in one place, your main primary focus is going to class and writing the papers and maybe doing a part-time job out there to pay for it, but you're really in seminary is the main thing. The online continuing education type experience has to be available for this. The second thing that needs to happen, I think, is this. We have made the masters the standard across most of our denominations, but the reality is, one of the realities we see is young people going into ministry, oftentimes once they've completed college, are wanting to jump immediately into ministry. And so they're getting these Bible degrees and trying to go on to mega churches because that's where they're accepted. Well, if the denominations, if the judicatories, my level will say, hey, this Bible degree might qualify you, I think that will help with the process. And still, the main thing we have to provide them are marketable skills besides the things we think are important for ministry. I don't know about you. I don't know how I would market my ability to translate Greek or Hebrew, in the marketplace. My undergraduate degree was in criminal justice. Now that was marketable. And it has been very helpful to me in ministry because it causes me to look at ministry concerns from a sociological perspective, because it's really a sociology degree rather than the traditional psychology or biblical studies types of perspective. But what if every I think we need more combination degrees. We need one of the things that was happening at Southern when I was there was a combination social work MDiv degree. That program was canceled for a lot of reasons that we don't need to go into now. But that has become a degree that's out there. There's some seminaries now that are doing a law degree and a seminary degree. There's some that are doing an MBA, But I think looking at what are the combination degrees that might be marketable, and not just marketable in metropolitan areas. So school teaching, making sure that they can be a school teacher, or teaching them entrepreneurial skills that they might be able to go out and start their own business. Things of that sort, I think, are some of the things that we need to be thinking about and challenging those who are students to think about, as far as, treat it like a mission field. How would you go into this small community and make a living while you proclaim Christ and start a new ministry? I know one young woman who her family, she's my children's age, so her parents helped us do the church dinners, during that time. And so she grew up in a big family, always being involved in the kitchen. And so now she's in a small community where she's a bivocational pastor, and she works in the school lunch program. Being willing to do that kind of thing is she has a master's degree, and yet she's willing to work in the school lunch program. One of the things that I think was helpful to me in this is I was on vacation with my wife earlier this summer, and I was up in the mountains, and I stopped at a Lowe's in one of these mountain resort towns, and I was looking for just something, and I asked this one guy about what I was looking for, and we struck up a conversation, and he said he just kind of did this part-time on the weekends and that kind of stuff. And I said, so what do you do full-time? What's your weekday job? And he says, well, I'm the prosecuting attorney for the county here. Now, if a prosecuting attorney is willing to work at Lowe's, and it may not be, I don't know his situation. I don't know whether it was economic or just because he wanted to be. Why should we be embarrassed if we have a pastor who drives a school bus? Why should we be embarrassed if we have a pastor who is working at Walmart? I think some of that stigma that has been out there about being professional has hurt us as well as helped us. That humility to be. I mean, Jesus was a carpenter. That humility to be a crass person. That humility to be to work in the service industry and be a pastor, I think, is something that we need to challenge both our churches and our the clergy to think about.
Dee Kelso, who's a colleague in the PCUSA with me, is asking the question, how do you think about bivocational ministry when you're in a tradition that values a really well-crafted sermon? And so they all saw you put 20 hours in to do your sermon. Well, that's now eaten up a half-time position. If you can really make any half-time, full-time position be 40 hours. But so how do you deal with that reality? She's saying, if someone puts 2 to 3 hours in the sermon, I'm not sure I want to listen to it.
Well,
and her church would.
So my doctoral degree was in sermon preparation, and one of the things that one of the myths that we have out there is that it takes 20 hours to do a sermon. We can spend 20 hours on a sermon, but the reality about sermon prep is that a lot of it can be done as you're doing as you go, as you're meditating upon it, and so there are ways to teach sermon preparation that don't take those 20 hours. That take more like maybe 2 to 3 is not enough. It may just be 2 to 3 of desk time. A lot of the sermon prep time is reflection time, and how you reflect and how you think through the sermon, and how you dwell upon it, and how you bring that scripture into your being, and in order to push it out there in the prep time. But beyond that, if you are partners in ministry, number one, you're not preparing the sermon every week, to be partners in ministry. If you're not, even if you have to prepare sermons every week, there is no shame in re-preaching sermons. There is no shame in reworking someone else's sermon and making it your own, giving appropriate credit, of course. One of the things that I learned, I'm called to preach. I mean, that was I had one of the 2 times in my ministry where I felt like I heard God was, I want you to be a preacher teacher. I mean, I heard that audibly. So I'm called to preach. I love preaching. If I'm not preaching, I'm jealous when I'm not up on the pulpit. That's that. But what I've learned is not everybody's there. A lot of pastors that preaching is not the most important thing. And I think the other thing that we need to recognize, not everybody is called to be that gifted communicator. They're called to be the pastor first, which is different than being the preacher. Fred Craddock told a wonderful story about how he was at one point when he was teaching and all that, he went to visit one of his relatives, and he or she, I can't remember, said, you need to come here. My pastor is such a great preacher, and and went on, and Fred said, well, I can't come this time, but next time we'll go down there. And so next time he's there, he goes down and he listens to the sermon, and he said quite literally, he says, it was okay. It was, but he said, and I knew my relative was going to ask me, what do you think? And so, so it gets done, and they get in the car and says, well, what'd you think? And he said, well, tell me what is so special about this, what do you find so exciting and thrilling about this passage? Well, when Dad died, he was, and the reality is, if you connect with them pastorally, they're going to hear, and God is going to use whatever they are able to offer. we're so bought into the idea, part of that idea is that the pastor is who builds the church through their preaching, through their teaching. And there's a lot of us who like to think that that's the reality. But the reality is that it's the ministry that takes place in that church that really builds that church. And if we let go of the idea that the primary purpose of the church is to proclaim the gospel in this one particular manner, then it's a little easier at that point. I'm called to preach, and I want powerful proclamation to be a part of the worship service, but that is not the primary purpose of the church. When I ask the question, what is the purpose of the church to our churches? Usually I get three things. One is the worship service. One is that they'll tell me is, to win souls. One is to do ministry, to meet needs. And one is just to be a family of God. And usually I get some version of those four when I ask people what the version of the church is. But the reality is all four of those things are not the purpose of the church. They are functions of the church. I really believe that the purpose of the church is to be the body of Christ in their community, in their world. And when we make that the purpose of the church, these functions become secondary. And so I guess that's how I would answer that question.
Well, what maybe one last question. What can regional bodies or what can congregations do to be more welcoming and to be more supportive of bivocational ministry?
Well, I think number one, to see that as being normal, that this is an appropriate way to be there and to honor those pastors and to work alongside them. We have to change the expectations of what the pastor is supposed to do. And that may be killing some sacred cows. When my first church, I was bivocational. I was a student pastor, so I was by definition bivocational. And so that first, I started in May or something like that. And about a month later, they said, well, Pastor, what are we going to do for Vacation Bible School this year? I said, I don't know. What are you going to do? And that year we did not have Vacation Bible School because it was not, I had not been there to plan it, and it was not and I basically told them that's not going to be my job. You have a Christian education committee to plan it. And so sometimes you may have to kill a few sacred cows in order to change that attitude. And then the second thing is what we're doing with the seminary. So regional bodies, I really think, oftentimes we schedule our pastoral meetings midweek because for full-time folks, that's the most convenient time. We're going to have to look at ways to facilitate meetings with pastors beyond the regular schedules, and just make that more normative for us as a part of who we are.
Steve, thank you so much. This has been a really rich conversation. We could certainly go on for a lot longer time, but and I do want to remind folks that I put links to both the article that Steve recently had published, but also the book from which it comes in the chat. I want to tell you a little bit about our webinar next week. Katie Shevel, who is an associate pastor in Wayne, Pennsylvania, is going to be with us. And she recently had a book published called Small But Steady Witness, Big Lessons from Little Churches. And it's reflection on her 5 years as a solo pastor in a small church in New Jersey, and talking about the strengths of those churches for creating faithful ministries. So we'll hope you will join us next week for the last installment in our small church series. Matt, anything you want to add before we say goodbye to everybody?
Just my thanks to Steve for his excellent wisdom today. So and hope that everybody joins us again next week.
All right. Thank you all for joining us. Have a good weekend.